Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time this evening to come along to the first of our parent partnership talks for the year. Obviously, we're not here in person, but we do appreciate you coming along. And also for anyone who's catching this slightly afterwards and watching a delayed version of it or in the next couple of days, thank you so much for taking the time. For those of you who don't know, I'm Stuart Murphy. I'm one of the assistant principals at Surbiton High. And me and my team are responsible for putting together the Scope Day that your daughters have been involved in today. And they were really lucky today to hear from a really wonderful speaker, which is Claire Harvey, who I'll be letting onto the screen in a minute. Claire has spoken to the girls today across the school from year 7 through to year 13 about the importance really of inclusion in various aspects of their day-to-day life, but also as it being important for their futures and for their careers and for whatever they go on to do next. And the message was really well received across the school today. So we've been very grateful to have Claire in, and I hope that you enjoy hearing from her this evening. I certainly learned a lot in the time that I listened today. I'm sure Claire, as I mentioned to her, could introduce herself, but Claire has a really very impressive CV. We feel very lucky to have her. She is a Paralympian. She is the founder of the Schools Inclusion Alliance, of which we are members. She is also, I think if I get this right, the Global Inclusion Lead for Vodafone. She's nodding, so I've got the title right. And really someone who, when I read about, not made me think two things. Firstly, we really must get Claire to talk to the school, and secondly, I really must achieve more with my life a little bit and do more and be better. It's very impressive. But I'm going to hand you over now to Claire. I think I've said enough to make her blush a little bit, and hopefully you'll enjoy the talk as much as I did. If you want to ask any questions, we do have the chat open, so feel free to pop any questions. There should be time for a little Q&A at the end. And I'll ask any questions that you put into the chat. I'll ask of Claire at the end. The talk should last around 40 to 45 minutes. So thank you again for your time, and without further ado, I'll pass you on to Claire.
Thank you. And what we're going to talk about today is really to understand some of the future skills that are going to be increasingly important and how you can support your young people to start to develop those skills now. As Stuart said, we spoke about this with the students this morning, so hopefully the conversation you're going to have after this session with them will really match the conversation that they've had, although of course I'm going to bring into your conversation some more age appropriate and things to think about in terms of the world around them and how we can best prepare them. So let's start to think about why this matters. Inclusion is the new superpower. When everything is changing, inclusion and what we have traditionally called the soft skills are the things that we now know are going to be increasingly important. This is one of my favourite quotes. The future's really up for grabs. The future's being made faster and faster, and change is getting more and more common, which means really for our young people, everything is up for question, everything is up for reshaping, everything is up for their ability to influence it. We also know that young people leaving university today are really struggling to fit into the workplace. Here are some statistics that you can see, all taken from the HBR survey in 2019. I've put all of the sources of what I've looked at so that you can see them later. But you can see that actually gone are the days where academic qualifications are enough. There is an increasing gap between what employers want and what young people are coming out of education with. And while schools are working quite hard to bridge that, it's something that we can absolutely play a role in as parents and as guardians of those young people. We also know that that pressure is really impacting young people. So you can see that students scored around about 20 to 22% lower than the UK population on all of the 4 wellbeing measures that are measured every year. So not only is what we're giving young people not really serving them, and there's an increasing gap between what's wanted and what they've got, but also it's not a great experience for them either. So it's a chance to really rethink things. This is from the World Economic Forum, and it tells us the skills that are really gaining in importance. It doesn't mean the other skills are not important. It just means they're becoming less important. So as we're shaping our young people's conversations and starting to help them think about what they'd like to be, it's really worth keeping this in mind. The role of the human in the workplace is changing dramatically. We can see this building into 4 key areas: how to solve solve increasingly complex problems, how to maintain our resilience and our capabilities and our lifelong learning so that we're ready for the ever-changing environment, how to build relationships and have influence and work with people increasingly on a global sphere, and how to use the technology that's available and develop and shape the technology in order for it to help us in our lives. This means we talk about the next generation as called the HECI generation: humanity, ethics, compassion, courage, inclusion, imagination, and empathy. Not things you often see on a CV, but we know that increasingly these will be the skills that young people will need in order to be successful, particularly in leadership. The good news is that we can really start to practice those skills now, and we can start to develop them so that we can role model them for our young people as well. Everything is about agility. In a world that we can't possibly be ready for, around 50% of the jobs that your young people are going to be going into haven't yet even been created. And so we can't possibly make them ready for those particular jobs. So agility becomes key. Here are some examples of what agility looks like. I'm not going to talk about this in any great length. You will see this if you're in the workplace, I'm absolutely sure. But again, when you've got time, have a think about some of these skills and thinking, how am I helping my young people to develop those skills and show those skills? And am I valuing those skills when the young people around me are demonstrating them? Or am I concentrating only on perhaps the tangible, tactical, academic type skills that are coming out? Very much thinking now about a move away from where and what people do to how they do it, and focusing on leadership as a set of behaviours as opposed to a job title or a position. Why does inclusion matter? We know that when people feel included and feel like they belong, then they absolutely thrive. And this is across all sorts of environments, whether it's the workplace, whether it's school, whether it's social activities, or whether it's home. We know that when people feel visible and valued and that they belong, they perform at their best. So when you're thinking about how you can get your young person to be more motivated to do their work, to really work hard, to go the extra mile, to feel more confident, we often think about the tactical things and how do we bribe them, if you're anything like me and my children, or how do we kind of use the stick approach? And actually what we can think about is the environment around them, and how do we maximizing their sense of inclusion and belonging, because that will create the outcome that you're looking for. And yet with all of this knowledge, and none of this knowledge is new, we know that progress in inclusion is still very slow. If you look at this graph, you may think, oh wow, it's suddenly jumped up. And we kind of do that quite a lot because our expectations are so low that you see a slight jump and you think this is progress. But when you think about, 50% of the population are women, and talent is everywhere, opportunity is just not. To get to 28% and see that as successful is a questionable place. And you will also see, of course, that the impact of the pandemic is disproportionately impacting women, both in their engagement, both in their opportunities, and also some of the socio-economic factors as well. So whilst we are making progress, we all as adults have a really big job to do to help our young people navigate the inequalities of life at the moment, whilst also fixing the system so that those barriers are removed for when they get there. We also need to think about what are those skills that those young people need. We know that, this is Alvin Toffler, one of my favourite futurists. We know that as things change and as technology increasingly does things for us, that the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read and write, because of course technology can do that for us now, but those people who can't evolve, those people who can't learn, but then importantly unlearn and relearn as the environment around them changes. I think this is challenging because the school system doesn't really accommodate this. The school system develops a sense of facts and figures and a right answer and a wrong answer. And so we have to work hard to enable young people to take that knowledge and transfer it into other areas using that agility skill. But also, as things change, to unlearn some of the things that we learnt when we were younger and to relearn new things in line with what's expected of us nowadays. I'm sure many of you are doing this process as we speak. Now, I'm going to give you some questions now to think about actually how much diversity is around all of our young people. And I'm going to ask you to just simply take some time to think about it. Put your answers in the chat box if you want. Doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. It just gives a sense of the diversities that surround us that perhaps we're not seeing. So how many children are born intersex in the UK? If you are thinking, oh my lord, what is she on? What does intersex mean? It's perfectly fine. When you think about a baby being born, you pick it up, you look at one part of its body and you say it's a girl or it's a boy. Intersex is where there's a difference between internal organs and external genitalia. This can be degrees of, so for some people, if you know Caster Semenya, the South African athlete, she is intersex. She's physically female, all of her organs are female, but her hormone levels are what you would traditionally find in a male body. Equally, I used to mentor a young man who was physically male, had male genitalia, identified as a boy, and at 14 started to menstruate because his internal organs were female. How many children are born intersex in the UK? The next question is one in how many people of working age in the UK have a disability? And by the term disability, I mean by the legal definition, any long-term medical condition which will last more than 12 months, which impairs your ability to lead a normal life. Frankly, a fascinating definition, because whilst I'm a wheelchair user and clearly have a disability, I don't know what it is that I can't do and what impairs my ability to lead a normal life, other than perhaps tap dancing. But you get the sense. It includes physical disabilities, mental health conditions, long-term chronic conditions as well. So one in how many people in the UK have a disability? And of those, what percentage are not declaring their disability at work? Stuart, I can't see the chat box, so if people are guessing, or indeed you want to guess, feel free to just shout out. The next question is people with an ethnic minority sounding, horrible expression, but that's the terms of the research, which is why it's in speech marks, are what percent less likely to get an interview than with a Caucasian sounding name with an identical CV? This was a study that was done that sent identical CVs perfectly matched to a whole range of jobs, different sections, different sectors, different job levels, 2 CVs always at the same time. All the facts were there except the change of name. So on one job thing, they sent a name that would lead people to believe that person was Caucasian, and on the other CV, identical CV, they sent a name that would lead someone to assume that that person was from an ethnic minority. What do you think the outcome was in terms of who got called for interview or not? The next question is one in how many adults are informal carers? And by that, I mean someone with an additional caring responsibility. So perhaps an elderly relative or a child with a disability or another family member with complex needs. And of those carers, what is the gender split? I'm testing your brain cells this evening. And the last question, the average age of knowing you are transgender is what? And by transgender, in this particular circumstance, I'm meaning a binary transition. So think about that baby, has female genitalia, assigned female at birth, identifies as male, or vice versa. So the average age of knowing you're transgender is what? And the average age of social transition, so no medication, just living in your true gender identity, is also what? So I'm going to give you the answers now. And as I give them to you, I want you to think about a couple of things. I want you to think about how much diversity is around me that I've never thought about, I might not have ever even talked about, and therefore, what am I not seeing? And I want you also to think about if this was something your young person was experiencing around them, would they feel comfortable to talk to you about it? Or if someone else was experiencing it around you, would they feel comfortable to talk to you? No judgment, just some reflection. So 1 in 1,000 children are born intersex. Think about your school community. What does that look like? And this, of course, is probably an underestimation because someone like Caster Semenya, if she were not an Olympic athlete, she would never have had that sex test, in which case she would never have known. These are the numbers where we know there's a significant enough differential that it causes a medical problem that leads to this diagnosis. 1 in 5 people of working age have a disability, and 67% of those are not declaring their disability at work. We're going to unpick where that might come from and the sense of what's right and what's wrong when we're young in just a second. People with an ethnic minority sounding name were 74% less likely to get an interview than the same CV perfectly matched to the job with a Caucasian sounding name. 1 in 8 adults are carers, and that is a 52%, 48% female-male split. I defy you to hear about a conversation about carers, Google carers and find a conversation about men, and yet we know that increasingly men tend to be older. Actually, they tend to come to carer duties older than women, but we know nearly half of those who are informal carers are men. And the average age of knowing you are transgender is 10, and the average age of social transition is 30. So still a massive gap between knowing and being able to be authentic to who you are. So some interesting facts, but just something for you to talk about. If we were here in person, I would be asking you to talk about what does that make you think, but hopefully you can reflect and maybe have conversations with the people around you. But when we're thinking about diversity, I want you to think much broader than the demographic differences that we often talk about and that are covered by the Equality Act. I want you to think about thinking styles, big picture thinkers versus minutiae detail thinkers, quick thinkers versus reflective thinkers. I want you to think about introverts versus extroverts. I would argue the education system is very much built around an extrovert framework, and actually introverts tend not to do so well in school. I want you to think about different perspectives, different experiences, even things like accents. So when we're thinking about helping our young person embrace diversity, we can get them to think about all of the things that are different rather than just the demographic characteristics. And whilst diversity is all around us, whether we're choosing to see it or not, what we therefore can do is practice inclusion, creating that environment where people feel valued, visible, and that they belong. It doesn't mean that everybody gets on. It doesn't mean that everybody agrees. It means that we can have uncomfortable conversations comfortably, we can challenge issues, and we can seek to address issues as they come up. But where trust that we're all trying to get to the same place is really implicit. Now, lots of people say to me, young people today, they just get it, don't they? They don't see difference. They grow up, particularly in London, they grow up in a very diverse community. The issue isn't them, but we just need to wait for them and they're going to make it all better. Unfortunately, we know this simply isn't the case. They have more information, absolutely, but their behaviours are not demonstrating levels of inclusion that would be commensurate with that information. Whilst they may feel more relaxed about things and be able to talk about things, as you can see on the screen, the facts speak for themselves. Nearly 45% of young people say that they've been bullied for being or being perceived to be LGBT+. 1 in 3 young disabled people have experienced prejudice by their peer group. When we look at benevolent sexism. And if you're not sure what benevolent sexism is, it's the difference between hostile sexism, as in, you know, I'm going to be intentionally unkind, but benevolent sexism is where we believe we're being chivalrous, where young men believe that they're doing the right thing by perhaps holding doors open for women, or supporting women, or standing up for women. But behind that intention is a belief that women are less than, weaker, and we know that benevolent sexism, if not challenged, can lead into othering views and wider sexism later days. We know that hate crimes have increased dramatically amongst this age group, and perhaps that's a good thing because people are reporting it more, but we also know that particularly areas around religious hate crime, for example, have really become an issue. And actually, on an individual level, we know that young people are experiencing much higher levels of anxiety than they have before. And when you look at the key 5 reasons of that anxiety, we know that 3 of those are related to their sense of fit, their sense of belonging, and their sense of whether they feel valued and visible. So there's lots of work to do, and we can't simply assume that young people just get it because they have all the information and they perhaps see things in a way that we didn't, because we know that isn't the case. We even know very young people have the links of association, the social stereotyping, and the connection between a type of person and a behaviour, even by age 10. This was a study done by McLaughlin and Killen in 2010, been replicated many times since with similar results. They showed children this simple picture, children from a broad range of backgrounds, a broad socioeconomic status, a broad range of ethnicities and cultural heritages themselves. And they simply asked the children, did the child on the floor fall, or was the child pushed? And overwhelmingly, when the black child was at the back, the assumption was that the white child was pushed, and when the white child was at the back, the overwhelming view was that the black child fell. Now, this is uncomfortable for us because we'd like to believe, as many of us grew up, and that we shouldn't see different. We shouldn't see colour. We should see beyond that. And young people don't see colour. But the reality is that is just not true. We also know that the damage that sense of right and wrong, belonging and not belonging can be huge, particularly around banter, things that our young people and maybe ourselves say and do under the premise of banter that absolutely is not banter. Banter is a very simple thing to work out, actually. If something is sent intensively positively and received positively, it's banter. If neither one of those 2 elements are positive, irrespective of the other, it isn't banter. So if somebody is not receiving something positively, even though you are intending to do it positively, it isn't banter, and vice versa. This is a story of young Dominic, who was 14-year-old, went to an independent school, was doing very well in school, went on a school trip, was dared to kiss another boy. It was everybody in the room knew it was all part of the dares, but when he went back to school, this conversation went viral and he was subject to banter. Nobody bullied him, nobody punched him, nobody threatened him. It was all what other people deemed to be light-hearted banter. Unfortunately, Dominic didn't see it that way. You can see the note that he left for his parents when he took himself to the top of a car park and jumped off. So we really have to understand that sense of belonging and that sense of fitting, not only is it essential for our young people to learn how to create for other people for their future success, but it's essential that they learn it now for helping each other navigate the impossibility and the increasingly difficult experience of growing up. Most of us want to be inclusive, but why is it so hard? It's so hard for 3 particular reasons. The first is we all grow up with a lens. We all see the world through our own lens based on our own experiences, and therefore we don't see things that aren't relevant to us. On top of that, we have really strong societal bias and conditioning that tells us very quickly what someone should or shouldn't be, who we should or shouldn't be, and what is acceptable or not acceptable in life through a whole drip feed of social biases and conditioning. And on top of all of those, when we do see things that feel unfair or unequal, unfortunately, we are not designed as humans to sit with the discomfort of that very well. So we tend to brush things away, we tend to try and justify things out, or we tend to try and move on, particularly when it's not relevant to us. And that means we never really challenge the situations that we see unless we are intentional in doing so. Here are some examples of societal conditioning. Absolutely, because it just took me 2 seconds off of the internet to get to these. But these are the messages that your young people are experiencing subliminally all of the time. By age 7, and I'm sure you know this, and I'm sure you've done work on this already in the school, by age 7, girls will tell you what is a girl's activity and what is a boy's activity. By age 10, young Black children's expectations and aspirations for their careers are strongly influenced by where they see other Black people. So these things really impact our thinking and create a paradigm for us. They create that sense of who am I not, what can I be, what can I not be, who should somebody else be, what should they not be, and what's right and what's not right, what feels comfortable and what feels uncomfortable. Super subtle. You see these things get moved around all the time. If you saw the news this week, you would see that Lego did a survey on their children and found that young boys were saying they would absolutely not want to play with the Lego that's designed now for girls. If you're my age, you will remember that at one point Lego was gender neutral in its design, but they found that boys had such a negative reaction to the Lego that was designed for girls that they're now moving back to move away some of the gender stereotype around their toys. We go in ebbs and flows of these things, but in reality, these societal messages remain extremely strong. And what does that do to us? What does the combination of those things do for us? Unfortunately, what it does is create the environment where we see what we expect to see and we hear what we're listening for, and we only look for things that validate our view. This is how you get to extremes of views on things like climate change, where everyone has access to the same information and yet people still hold extreme opposite and polar views, because we only look and see the information that proves what we believe to be true in about 7 seconds of seeing any particular situation. Building on top of that, we then only look for information that validates that. We unconsciously react to things that don't fit what we believe to be true. I'm sure as parents, you've experienced those times when young people have come to talk to you about something and then suddenly stopped because we've shut down the conversation with our body language. I'm sure most of you have also been on the receiving end of that, where you've started a conversation with someone and you immediately sense this is not going to be a good conversation, so you divert the conversation away. We make those associations, sometimes deliberately through the media and things, sometimes unintentionally. If I said the word, if I said disabled to you, you would all have a view in your mind about what that looks like, an instant picture come to your brain. We also have what we call micro behaviours. You may have heard them talked about as microaggressions. That's one tiny part of a bigger thing called micro behaviours, where we leak what we feel. Have you ever been in that situation where someone says, it's so nice to see you, and everything in their tone and their body language and the atmosphere in the room says that's absolutely not what is going on? Similarly, if you're like me, a bit of an introvert, those networking events where you go and talk to people and they're chatting away, but you sense that they're looking over your shoulder, waiting for the more interesting people to come in. So we're leaking what we're feeling, and we're picking up those messages like beacons that were driven originally to tell us, are we safe or are we not safe? And our brains haven't really transformed from that, but we now use them to think about, am I safe or am I not safe from a social environment? So no matter what you're telling your young people, your body language will be giving away what you actually think, and will be opening up conversations or will be shutting conversations down. We also know that the impact of feeling excluded is huge. This is a study called Cyberball, comes from the University of California, and what they wanted to do was test what happens to us physiologically and psychologically when we feel excluded. They asked people to take part in this game. The person was wired up to a machine. They believed that there was also 2 other real people taking part in the game that they could see online. In reality, there wasn't. And what happened was the ball simply was passed around between the 3 people. What we saw was exactly what you'd expect to see. You know, our attention comes towards us as the ball comes towards us. It wanes when the ball leaves, but everything else was very calm, very collected, very relaxed, until, as you can see now, the 2 avatars started to pass the ball between each other and miss out the real person. What we saw at that point was every single threat response going off. People's heart rate quickened, their pulse got faster, their body, they dilated, their eyes dilated, their amygdala started firing, the neurons fired much quicker. Exactly the same response as when we feel physically in pain or physically threatened. And what this tells us is our bodies don't know the difference between feeling excluded, and feeling is an important word in there because perception is reality, and being in physical pain or being physically threatened. Now, if your child was being physically threatened, you absolutely would know what to do and you'd be expecting a reaction and you'd be dealing with that reaction. What we need to understand is that for some young people, if they feel excluded, the same physiological and psychological impacts are happening. So what can we do? We need to recognise that intentional behaviour will get us where we need to be. Inclusion doesn't happen by osmosis and it doesn't happen by desire. So we need to make sure we are putting in foundation skills to help our young people both feel like they belong and also be able to demonstrate that and create that for other people as a future skill. And unfortunately, we are the best ability to do that. Our children imitate our behaviours and our experiences really strongly. So we have to make sure we are role modelling those behaviours. Build onto that what you say is much less relevant to shaping their view of the world as opposed to what you do. What they see on an everyday, what they see when you're not talking about inclusion, what they see and how they see you interact with people, and what they see you take an interest in and not take an interest in will much more shape their view of the world and their ability to practice these skills more than the speech that you want to give them about how important this is. So what can you do to role model the right behaviours? You can do 3 things. The first is you can react. When you see inequality, you can react. The standard we walk past is the standard we accept. So if they see you standing up and speaking out about inequality and doing something about inequality, then they are much more likely to be able to do the same themselves. They also need to see you become a visible ally, whether that's for a particular group or just across the piece. But being an ally is not a noun, it's a verb. It's what we do that matters. If you're in the workplace, we have that often sometimes view that if we put on a rainbow lanyard, for example, that's it, I'm an ally. It doesn't matter at all. It's an act of doing. It's what we do. So you can be involved in things, be part of things, or go to events, learn stuff, watch things and then have a conversation about it, because again, that will role model this for your young people. And like I said before, most important is you demonstrating those behaviours every day in the small interactions, and I am sure you know what that means. We also need to be open to different views. That paradigm that I talked about that we create of what something is or isn't, we need to be willing to learn, unlearn and relearn for ourselves as well. And this means opening ourselves up to a change of opinion, to seeing things from different perspectives, to recognizing that actually in the world of people, there is very rarely a right and wrong. There's just very different perspectives. And putting ourselves in a position where we'll be willing to have what might feel like uncomfortable conversations. And as a parent myself, I know they're uncomfortable when you feel like your young people know more than you do on a subject. That's a really counterintuitive parent-child relationship, but I promise you it will be worth it. Now, often parents say to me at this point, but I'm scared of saying the wrong thing. What if I get the language wrong? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I show what I don't know? And I would say that's a great thing, because it enables your young person to do the same, and you can have a really uncomfortable conversation and reflect and be better because of it. In the world of inclusion, we talk about being clumsily human. We're not hardwired to be inclusive. We all have our own lens, and sometimes we're not thinking as much as we should be, and therefore we're always going to get it wrong, particularly when you think about some areas such as ethnicity and cultural heritage, or sexual orientation and gender identity and disability. Even people within those communities don't agree on some of the terminology of what they want people to use, and therefore if you're an outsider to those communities, the chances of you getting it right for everyone is very, very slim. So accept the fact that we're going to get it wrong, but accept the fact that when we do that, we're going to be called in. So we're not going to be told off, but we're going to learn from that. And it's an opportunity for us to sit with the discomfort and to learn from it. We also make sure we need to build psychological safety around our young people, the absolute underpinning of performance, well-being and inclusion and developing these future skills. We could do a whole session on psychological safety. So I will just succinctly say there are 4 elements to psychological safety that you can look for around your young people. Is it safe for them to learn? And by that, it means, is it safe for them to not know? Is it safe for them to make mistakes and that doesn't feel catastrophic? The next is it safe to challenge? Is it safe to disagree? Is it safe to say something isn't working for them? Is it safe to say they have a different opinion? Is it safe to collaborate, which means helping each other be better as opposed to compete? And is it safe for them to be authentic? Is it safe for them to be simply who they are and not have to second guess how you're going to judge them or how other people are going to judge them, and not trying to fit into the unspoken rules of our family or our school or our society or our friendship group of what I'm expected to be as opposed to who I truly am? Look out for some of the signs for this and see where you would put your young people, and perhaps which one you might need to work on, mostly by giving them explicit permission to do so and responding positively when it happens. But this is the absolutely fundamental underpinning to all of the future skills. We're in for the long haul, and their environment is going to change far faster than ours ever did. And so we need to develop their emotional fitness. We can do this by encouraging them to acknowledge their feelings and the feelings of others, recognizing that sometimes our intention isn't to offend someone, but we can still hurt someone, and we must recognize that and do something with it. We can help them to show appreciation and focus on what they have got and what they can control, rather than, particularly at the moment, the level of change and uncertainty that's around them. We can encourage them to pay more attention to their own emotions and work with them rather than try and pretend they're not there. We've fallen into a bit of a trap as humans of going into what I call the toxic positivity trap, where we want to gloss over things. So perhaps your child comes home and says, oh, I really fell out with my friends today and it's really stressing me out. And we often feel the need to either fix it or to gloss over and deal with the discomfort. So we tend to say things like, oh, it'll all be all right tomorrow, I'm sure. Or don't worry, there's lots of people in school. You won't even remember them in 6 months. Now, whilst they may be true, what that's called is toxic positivity. What it does is invalidates the person's emotions that they're having and almost dismisses how they're feeling. So make sure you're not doing that, but you're allowing them to recognize their emotions and work with their emotions rather than pretend they're not there. Of course, well-being is central to this, but also getting comfortable with ambiguity, getting comfortable with the fact that increasingly today there's no right or wrong answer. There's just areas of grey, and we need to get used to that. We can role model and encourage the right mindset. And I know you've done lots of stuff around growth mindset and fixed mindset, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. But enabling our young people to be able to say, I did think this and now I've changed my mind, and that's a good thing, is really key, particularly as the world is changing, and their sense of that ability to learn, unlearn and relearn will be grounded in whether it's safe or not to grow and fail and learn from that situation. We can also make sure we're able to hold good conversations, and the world is full of good information, books, podcasts, documentaries, internet things at the moment. So there really is no excuse to not know about things. So pick the subjects you personally feel really uncomfortable about, perhaps from the questions I asked you earlier, and make it your responsibility to learn something about it. You don't go from being unaware to advocate overnight, but think about how you could take yourself one step further, and perhaps even better, you as a parent or guardian to that child, you could learn together about something you both recognize you don't know lots about. This will really help demystify things. It will really help kind of create empathy, again, one of the key future skills, and it will really help break down some of the societal biases and drip feeds conditioning that young people have in their head, which will only serve them well in the future. You can also build your and therefore their subconscious by getting to know people who are really different to you. Test out your biases. There's a free online test called the Harvard Implicit Bias Test. It will help you understand what your preferences are. Hugely uncomfortable because we like to think that we don't have any, but it tells you your preferences, not that you're an ist. If you have a preference, for example, towards men or women, it doesn't make you sexist. It just means your natural thinking pattern will always prefer and have views one way or the other, and knowing that information can only help us check our assumptions in time and make sure we're switching on our thinking. Make sure they are diversifying their in-group, so they're not just working with people who are really like them, they're not just socializing with people they're really like them, but they're building opportunities to meet as many young people from as many different environments as they can, and they're learning from that experience. And of course, when you do the same, also talk about it, because it will help them do the same. What can we do tangibly at home? So we can start to do 4 key things. The first is be intentional in your strategies to promote and embed inclusion. Now, this doesn't mean every night you need to have a conversation about inclusion, every given opportunity. Pick the moments where it feels relevant, but perhaps when you see something on the TV and it brings up a subject, start that conversation. Don't assume that because you've inferred something, your young people will too, particularly dependent on their age, but just make a small comment. Strictly Come Dancing is a great example at the moment. It has people of all different ethnicities. It has a person who is profoundly deaf and uses sign language. It has a same-sex couple dancing. Your reaction to that, your conversation around that, will be telling young people whether this is a good conversation to have or a not good conversation to have, and shaping their view on therefore their future skills. Make sure you are discussing it, but without trying to be an expert. It's okay to not know. It's okay to try and work it out together, or even just recognize you don't know. And then most importantly, as we've said many, many times, you'll get the message, role model those behaviours in yourself. It can feel very complicated, whether you're talking about sexual orientation or gender or ethnicity and cultural heritage. Those things can feel really complicated and a little bit overwhelming. But actually, it's just about simple messages. It's about being kind and respectful to every person. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels valuable, visible, and that they can belong. We don't have to agree. We don't have to have the shared view on whether something is right or wrong, socially acceptable or not. The beauty of inclusion is that we can all have different opinions, but we can do so with kindness and respect. That ability to hold tension and to disagree and have a conflict but move forward, again, is going to be an increasingly future key skill to have. So helping young people practice that now can only be helpful. And if we just circle everything around the fact that differences are a strength, if we leverage the differences around us, then we will all be better for it, and that we should celebrate our differences, not hide or be destructive around our differences, then you're not going to go far wrong. I hope I haven't terrified you. I hope I've given you lots of things to think about, but most importantly, I hope you savour the journey. I know that I'm learning every day, and I am an inclusion warrior, and yet there's still things I don't know, and there's still things I thought I knew, and then I find out something different and it reshapes my view of the world, and that's the journey. And this is one of my favourite quotes about the role of education. Our role as educators, whether we are teachers or whether we are parents, is to help our young people have the skill set, have the knowledge and have the passion to change the world for the better, not to follow in our path, not to replicate what we believe to be true, but to forge their own path and to make the world a better place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much for that talk. There aren't any questions at the moment. I wonder if I watch these talks. I get the gift of watching these talks as a parent, I'm not scared. You'll be pleased to know, but I certainly, there was an awful lot to take in there, and it's given me a huge amount to think about as a parent. So I suspect if those people who are watching are maybe feeling the same way at the moment. So thank you again for your time and all the with the students across the whole school today. I hope that we'll see the benefit of that over the coming years, and I'm inspired for sure now to educate them to find their own way and not to just do the things we did. I do like that quote as well, so I might just steal that. So thank you very much for that, and thank you again to everybody who's watching now, or who is watching not live. There's probably a better way of describing that. And I look forward to seeing everybody when we have another session. We've got one coming up in November, which is about self-defense. So please do keep an eye out for that. And hopefully at some point we'll be doing these in person again as well. So thank you everybody for your time, and thank you again to Claire for her time today. Bye bye.